Hey everybody, it's Atheist for the Cause here, and I wanted to talk about the 3 versus 3 capitalist versus socialist debate that Sargon of Akkad took part in. He was a capitalist, there were two other capitalists, and then there were three um, socialists. One of them was Zini, I think the name was. I wasn't familiar with the other people that were debating outside of Sargon, but basically it was it was long. It was like 4 hours, and honestly, you're not gonna learn much. Not to be mean, but um, it was kind of basic stuff in my opinion that I think even most people listening and debating already had heard all of these arguments, and it's kind of just what you think about them. I guess talking about it is still healthy, but I was hoping for some more unique arguments from one side or the other. And I found, I'm coming from the capitalist side, so maybe that's why, but I found that, some of the socialist stuff that when there were disagreements between capitalism and socialism, and it seemed to be disagreements on a factual basis, it seemed to just be the socialists were wrong, like over and over. Even when I went to Zazzini's channel, not to call him out, and I watched this, video, and he claims things like, you know, Coca-Cola is, where they were using like paramilitary basically to force people to do things, and that wasn't the truth. Like, actually, Coca-Cola was the case against them was dismissed, and then the people actually tried to bring Coca-Cola that were suing tried to bring Coca-Cola back into it, and it was dismissed again, and then the appeals court held up the dismissal, and the original dismissal, there are two bottling companies included as well. The two bottling companies from South America stayed in the lawsuit because the judge let Coca-Cola off but kept the two bottling companies in. And then when the victims tried to get Coca-Cola back into it, that was dismissed, as well as the two bottling companies had the case dismissed against them. And then there was like war crimes were dismissed because it wasn't during wartime, or at least the victims didn't prove that. And then there was, they tried to raise humanitarian issues, and those were dismissed. And then by the Colombia government. Humanitarian issues by the Colombian government. This court case happened in the U.S. And then it went to the 11th Circuit Court, Appeals Court, and that was dismissed. The dismissal was upheld. So, I mean, and this was from like way back in 2001. The case started. And even if you make the case, I don't really understand where it gets you. Like, sure, capitalism has some corruption. I don't think that, and there weren't even many victims in this case. It was like, so some, basically some paramilitary went after some trade unionists. Well, that's not really the fault of capitalism, first of all, and second of all, even if it was the trade unionism, that is actually a part. They make it seem like that's a part of the socialism. That's a part of capitalism. So it's corruption of capitalism against capitalism at the best. So I don't know, the whole thing was misleading and factually inaccurate. And if you look at his argument about how we have the ability to turn over our entire job system over to robots right now, that's just not true. We can't do that. We don't have the technical ability. So there were a number of issues. And then he said things like and this was on a video, not in the debate, but I don't think he said it in the debate. Maybe it did, but things like capitalism is meant to, turn into socialism. But if you look around the world, post-industrialization, but if you look around the world, like, It's actually socialism that has paved the way in Asia for uh, capitalism, not the other way around. And once a country becomes capitalist, they stayed capitalist even after they industrialize. So, I mean, we're post-industrialization, and the U.S. is still capitalist. We're not better off socialist, in my opinion, and I don't see any evidence that we're necessarily better off under socialism. So, anyways, I'm going on a little rant here, but so I think because these people, you know, they have a really good idea. These socialists have a pretty good idea of anti-capitalist concepts, but they don't really have a good idea of like socialist concepts, how their socialism would work. That was pretty clear. Like even straight out of the gate, their like definition of socialism was largely anti-capitalism. So I would argue that a better debate would possibly be capitalism versus anti-capitalism, because then they don't need to have they don't need to offer their own sort of position on what we should have, because there can be good criticisms of capitalism, which we have right now, and you know, you can still disagree with that socialism would be better or that any alternative would be better, and then you'd be left with, okay, let's reform capitalism then. And so capitalism versus anti-capitalism allows for a much more productive debate, in my opinion. But you could also go with a dichotomy of like neoliberalism versus neoconservatism. I found it really interesting that none of you guys seem to take on the term neoliberal when the socialists brought that up. Because, I mean, I've called myself a classical liberal in the past and stuff, but really I think I'm a neoliberal when it comes down to it. It's hard, depends how people define these terms, but you guys all seem to take on like very neoliberal positions where we should have regulation. We shouldn't be completely hands off as a government. Our government shouldn't be completely hands off of the economy. We should have government intervention for safety nets and things like that. We shouldn't leave it up to charities. That seemed to be the position of pretty much all of you guys. And those are neoliberals positions. So I think you should, especially Sargon, you should really consider your not taking on a neoliberal identity. Then the other point I wanted to make was about when a lot of people talk about capitalism and the poor. And this is what a capitalism versus anti-capitalism debate could get you. Or even a neoliberal versus neoconservative debate. Is that a lot of times conservatives say that the poor should pull themselves up by the bootstraps. And I actually largely agree. That's a good message to an individual. And, neoliberals believe in individualism. So if you see a poor person or an unemployed person, you should say, if you work hard, you can improve your situation. But on a macro scale, which conservatives constantly apply this to a macro scale, that does not work at all. Because, so say we have, 10 million jobs, just for an easy number. I mean, we have way more jobs than that, but let's just say we have 10 million jobs in our hypothetical society economy. And then you have like 15 million workers. So 5 million workers are unemployed, potential workers are unemployed, and then your 10 million workers are employed. Well, if 5 million of those people pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and get jobs, it doesn't mean we have more jobs. So that means they have to take the job of 5 million people. Now, if you want to make this more complex, you can say, well, there might be like a million jobs that are, there might be a million jobs that are completely vacant. So the 5 million, it can take on, they can get a million of those jobs, but 4 million of them would still be kicking some of the 10 million off into the poor. So unless you create more jobs as a model, and unless capitalism creates more jobs, then there are destined to be unemployed people. And blaming the poor, or I should say blaming the unemployed here, does not make sense. The model itself just didn't create enough jobs. And sure, you can say that they can go and create jobs theoretically, they can create businesses and stuff like that, but it's really not up to the unemployed, and these people are going to be largely poor. It's not up to them to create jobs realistically in practicality. It's up to the people with money, not just rich. I mean, middle class people can do it, and some poor people can create jobs, but there are a lot of issues. You have to find a way to get money and things like that. And if you don't have anything, then it's hard to get a loan. I mean, say you don't have a house or a car or anything like that. What are you supposed to give up for collateral for a loan? So realistically, it's up to the middle and rich class to create jobs, and realistically, there's always going to be, it's considered to be like 5% unemployment as healthy. In the US right now, we're at like 4.4% unemployment, and that's considered really low. It might even have, I think the 4.3% was like historically low. So, but that's, out of however many workers we have 300 million people. There's probably, I don't know, 150 million workers or something like that. If you have 4.3% of them unemployed, you still have a shit ton of unemployed people. And sure, a lot of times these are these people, a lot of them aren't good for working, you know what I mean? It actually makes sense not to have them working. They're going to be some of the least efficient, least knowledgeable people. That's why a lot of times they don't have jobs. But they still deserve to live, in my opinion. And I do think that the right to life is a human right. And so the ability to eat and, I think shelter is actually a necessity of living. Some other things make a lot of sense, and so the government should provide these, because if the charities are providing them, even if they provide them more efficiently, there's no guarantee that charities will exist long term and meet the need. So even if we have the ability to meet the need, the government can guarantee that we meet the need, especially if we have the ability. Now, so this is I've seen Stefan Molyneux make these types of arguments against the poor, and it really bothers me because I don't think it's in practicality telling the poor to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, which is constantly what the progressives say, that's like a bullshit argument. Their issue, the progressive issue, is that they won't apply, the bootstrap argument to an individual, which they should, because applying that argument, telling poor people that they can get out of their situation if they work hard, is a great message to them. But it's a great micro argument. It's a horrible macro argument. So that's just what I thought of the debate and how I would reframe the debate. I think there should be another one. I would love this kind of thing. I think it should go down to 2 versus 2. I really didn't. I thought 3 versus 3 was a little too much, to be honest. And in order to get more in depth, you're going to need fewer people, I think. I'd rather hear, you know, so if it was 4 hour debate and it's 2 versus 2, each person speaks for, say, 45 minutes, and like an hour is lost in introductions and moderating and breaks and things like that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I would love to, you know, see these debates more often. And I hope I improve the model and consider what I said, and that's all I've got for you now. So I'll talk to you guys later, and I'd love to hear what you think.